The night was thick and heavy, the kind that pressed against the skin, making the air feel almost tangible. The narrow streets of Ruse, a medieval town in the shadow of the Grand Cathedral of Tarragona, were silent except for the occasional echo of footsteps. The moon, a pale sliver, offered little light, and the flickering torches lining the cobblestone paths cast long, dancing shadows. It was in this setting that the town's most powerful men gathered, not in the grand halls of the cathedral, but in a modest chamber within the town hall. 24 eminent citizens, chosen for their wealth and influence, sat solemnly around a wooden table. They were the town's judges, tasked with a grim responsibility to decide the fate of a man accused of a heinous crime. The air was thick with tension, the weight of their decision hanging over them like a dark cloud. The accused, a young man with a gaunt face and desperate eyes, stood before them, bound by heavy chains. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his eyes darted from one judge to another, searching for a glimmer of mercy. But mercy was a rare commodity in Ruse, especially when it came to matters of justice. The town's justice system was a blend of local and royal authority, a delicate balance that had evolved over centuries. The same men who governed the town men who managed its markets, its trade, and its people were also the ones who handed down sentences. It was a system that was both familiar and fearsome, a reflection of the town's unique power structure. The investigation had been thorough, conducted by the jurisdictional officers who had gathered evidence, interrogated witnesses, and pieced together the crime. But the final verdict was in the hands of these 24 eminent citizens. They were not just judges, they were the town's leaders, and their decision would shape the fate of the accused and the town itself. The president of the court, a stern man with a silver beard, stood and addressed the accused. "Do you have anything to say before the jury passes its sentence?" The young man's voice was barely a whisper. "I am innocent, my lords, I swear it. I did not do what they say I did." The room was silent, the weight of his plea hanging in the air. But the judges had heard countless such pleas before. They were not swayed by words alone. They needed evidence, and the evidence was damning. One of the judges, a wealthy merchant with a reputation for fairness, spoke up. "The evidence is clear, my lord. The witnesses have testified, and the facts are before us. Justice must be served." The president nodded gravely. "Very well. The jury will now deliberate and reach a verdict." The young man's eyes widened with fear as the judges began their discussion. The room was tense, the air thick with the weight of their decision. The fate of the accused and the justice of the town hung in the balance. In Ruse, as in many medieval towns, the municipal and judicial tasks were intertwined. The same men who governed the town were responsible for its justice. They were the ones who judged the cases brought before them, from petty theft to the most serious crimes. The system was designed to be representative, with the eminent citizens reflecting the will of the town. But it was also a system that could be manipulated, where the powerful had the upper hand. In nearby Valls, the juries were composed of probos hamines, or good men, who were responsible for both municipal governance and legal decisions. They were the ones who judged the cases initiated by the jurisdictional official, ensuring that justice was served according to their good understanding. In Tarragona, the local government explicitly stated that the eminent citizens who took part in trials had to be the same as those who held responsibilities in the council. This meant that the same men who represented the town, who ruled and claimed their rights, were also the ones who handed down sentences, including the death penalty. The procedure was clear. When the jurisdictional officers finished their investigation, they presented their findings to the municipal council. The council would then deliberate, considering the case among other matters of local interest, before announcing the verdict. In Cervera, this process was followed meticulously. The council received the confession, inquisition, and trial, and dealt with the case before announcing the verdict reached by a majority of its members. In Leda, the system was even more entrenched. Crimes were not presented to ordinary officials, but to the municipal representatives, the Lord Councillors of the city of Leda. The local government paid the costs of corporal and capital punishments, further cementing their role in the justice system. The goal was not to annul the king's jurisdiction, but to align with it, to speak in the name of the king's authority while maintaining local control. The power to punish crime was a central aspect of local governance. In Leda, it was explicitly stated that cases leading to physical punishment should not be judged by the jurisdictional officer, but by the municipal representatives. The task of dictating death penalties was placed in the hands of the local eminent citizens, who would then pass their judgment to the president of the court for execution. In Barcelona, the system was even more direct. The royal vicar would conduct the investigation, but the verdict was ultimately decided by the trial of eminent citizens. The local authorities selected the members of the tribunal, ensuring that the decision was in line with the town's interests. The choice of specific eminent citizens reflected the tensions within the urban oligarchy, with different strata vying for power and influence. The system was not without its flaws. In Leda, the lesser hand, representing the less powerful members of the town, often complained about the lack of representation and the monopolization of power by the more influential groups. The fear of corruption and bias was ever present, leading to tensions and conflicts within the town's leadership. In Tortosa, the tensions were even more acute. A judge once refused to share the judicature with members of the opposing faction, leading to a fracture that split the town. The desire for a fair and impartial justice system was often at odds with the political and social dynamics of the town. The lack of legal knowledge among local representatives was another challenge. The development of the Romanist legal model, with its emphasis on formal procedures and legal expertise, clashed with the system based on the good offices of the local eminent citizens. The king encouraged this conflict, hoping to reinforce the role of his own officials and contain the rise of municipal power. In Cervera, the royal officers used the new constitutions to refuse to comply with the local traditions, leading to a confrontation over the application of torture and the death penalty. The need for legal guarantees and the presence of jurists became a point of contention, as the town's leaders struggled to maintain their authority while adhering to the new legal standards. In Tortosa, stability was achieved by requiring one of the two judges to be a professional jurist, who would act as a legal assessor to the other members of the jury. In Leda, a similar agreement was reached, with a legal assessor being present to ensure that the sentences were handed down according to the law. The speed with which local powers resorted to the death penalty was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed for swift justice and served as a deterrent. On the other hand, it often lacked the necessary legal guarantees and made it difficult for the accused to appeal. In Barcelona, a man was condemned to the gallows and executed the following day, a stark example of the town's commitment to swift justice. The tension between local and royal authority was a constant struggle. In Tàrrega, the city of Barcelona, acting as the lord of the town, tried to avoid the local trial by eminent citizens because it was hurried. The city's procurator was sent to ensure that the process was conducted maturely and in good order, reflecting the city's desire to maintain control and avoid further tensions. The requirement for legal guarantees and the establishment of clear channels of appeal became a tool to strengthen royal power. The king's officials and the High Court played a crucial role in ensuring that the justice system was fair and impartial, even as local leaders sought to maintain their influence. The young man in Ruse, bound by chains, waited anxiously as the jury deliberated. The fate of the accused and the justice of the town hung in the balance. The system of local power and justice was a complex web of tradition, politics, and legal evolution, a reflection of the town's unique identity and the broader struggles of medieval society. The president of the court stood once more, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. The jury has reached a verdict. The accused is found guilty. The sentence is death by hanging. The young man's eyes filled with tears, and his body shook with fear. The room remained silent, the gravity of the decision sinking in. The judges filed out, their faces grave, leaving the accused to face his fate. The night was still dark, but the town of Ruse had once again shown that justice, in its own way, had been served. In late medieval Catalonia, the death penalty was more than just a form of punishment. It was a tool for moral instruction. People believed that swift execution could deter others from committing crimes. In Manresa, for example, the goal was to execute a condemned prisoner the very next day after sentencing. This urgency was evident in a notable case from 1428, where a high-ranking official, the fiscal of the royal vicar, was executed just 2 days after being found guilty of murdering a canon in the main church of Manresa. To ensure the death penalty was applied quickly, authorities often sought ways to expedite the process. In Barcelona, municipal laws were particularly harsh on repeat offenders. For instance, beggars and pimps could be expelled from the city for their first offense, face corporal punishment for a second offense, and receive the death penalty for a third. In 1442, a man was hanged for pimping, having been previously banished from the city and beaten upon his return. The law was clear. If he returned a second time, he would be executed without further trial. The legal system in Catalonia was complex, involving a mix of constitutional guarantees, legal practices, and popular beliefs. This system conditioned the way ordinary justice was administered. For example, in 1442, a man was executed immediately after being caught pimping for a third time. The municipal laws were precise about the penalties for reoffending, and this justified the immediate execution without the need for a final verdict from the tribunal of eminent citizens. The application of capital punishment was influenced by the stable legal framework and the expectations of the people. In Barcelona, the death penalty was seen as a necessary part of maintaining order and moral standards. The city's laws were designed to be both fair and swift, ensuring that repeat offenders did not have the chance to continue their criminal activities. The legal process was also shaped by the roles of various officials and the structure of the courts. Judges and other legal authorities were expected to be well educated and experienced, often requiring training in both civil and canonical law. The involvement of eminent citizens in the legal process ensured that justice was not only swift, but also seen as just by the community. In practice, the death penalty was often applied based on the reputation and previous offenses of the accused. If a person was known to have a bad reputation or had committed similar crimes before, this could be used as evidence against them. For example, if someone was suspected of murder and had a history of violence, this reputation could be used to justify harsher punishment, including the death penalty. The legal system in Catalonia also emphasized the importance of local community involvement. Eminent citizens and local officials played key roles in the legal process, often serving as judges or jurors. This ensured that the community had a say in the administration of justice, which helped to maintain trust in the legal system. In cases involving capital punishment, the law was strict and the process was swift. If someone was caught committing a serious crime, especially if they were a repeat offender, they could be executed quickly. The goal was to send a clear message to the community that such behavior would not be tolerated. The legal system in late medieval Catalonia was a careful balance of tradition, law, and community values. While the death penalty was a severe punishment, it was seen as necessary to maintain order and uphold moral standards. The rapid application of the death penalty was a way to ensure that justice was both swift and effective, reinforcing the social and legal norms of the time. In medieval Catalonia, the city of Barcelona stood as a beacon of law and order, where the rights and privileges of its citizens were carefully guarded. The city's governance was complex, involving a blend of royal, municipal, and feudal authorities, each with their own roles and responsibilities. One of the most significant aspects of this governance was the Jui de Promens, a unique judicial system that allowed the city's leading citizens to participate in criminal trials. The Jui de Promens was a council of prominent men, known as promens, who were selected to judge criminal cases. This system was a testament to the high regard in which the city's leading citizens were held. These promens were not just any citizens. They were respected figures, often from the bourgeoisie and nobility, who were considered to have the wisdom and integrity to make fair judgments. The promens were not professional judges, but they were expected to apply the law with fairness and wisdom. The Jui de Promens operated under specific rules and procedures. For instance, if a criminal case was brought before the city, the promens would be called to form a council to hear the evidence and deliver a verdict. The evidence presented could include confessions, inquiries, and processes that had been conducted by other officials, such as the Veguer governor or the city's council. The promens would then deliberate and make a decision based on the evidence and the law. However, the Jui de Promens was not without its challenges. There were instances where the governor or other royal officials would try to overstep their bounds and make judgments without involving the promens. This was seen as a violation of the city's privileges, and could lead to protests and even legal challenges. For example, in 1486, a governor hung a man in Sant Feliu, a territory of Barcelona, without involving the Jui de Promens. The city's council strongly protested this action, insisting that the man should have been judged by the Promens according to the city's privileges. The city's council and the Promens also had to navigate the complex relationships between different levels of authority. For instance, the king or his representatives might intervene in criminal cases, sometimes leading to conflicts. In one notable case, a man named Joan Pages was condemned to death for theft by the king's vice-chancellor. However, the city's council, aware of the man's right to be judged by the Jui de Promens, intervened and successfully had the sentence halted. The man was then brought before the Jui de Promens, where he received a fair trial, and was ultimately sentenced according to the law. The Jui de Promens was not just a judicial system. It was also a symbol of the city's autonomy and the rights of its citizens. The Promens were often drawn from the city's leading families, which reinforced the social and political structure of the city. This system helped to maintain the balance of power between the city's council, the royal authorities, and the citizens themselves. In other parts of Catalonia, similar systems of local justice were in place. For example, in Lleida, the city had its own system of governance, with the Pària City Council and the Veguer governor playing key roles. The Pària was responsible for the day-to-day administration of the city, while the Veguer represented the king's interests and had the authority to conduct investigations and bring charges. However, even in Lleida, the final judgment in criminal cases often involved the participation of local notables, similar to the Promens in Barcelona. The Jui de Promens and similar systems in other Catalan cities reflect the complex and decentralized nature of governance in medieval Catalonia. These systems were designed to ensure that justice was fair and that the rights of citizens were protected. They also served to maintain the balance of power and reinforce the social and political order of the time. Despite the challenges and conflicts, these systems played a crucial role in the governance and stability of medieval Catalan cities. In late medieval Catalonia, the death penalty was a powerful tool used to maintain social order and assert authority. During times of crisis, such as the revolt by Berengar Aller in 1285, the disturbances in Jewish neighborhoods in 1348, and the violent pogroms of 1391, the authorities did not hesitate to impose the death penalty swiftly. These punishments were meant to serve as a warning to others, showing the consequences of challenging the established order. For example, those who participated in the 1391 pogroms, even if they were only involved in insults and assaults, were often sentenced to death. The death penalty was also used in more routine cases, but with more discretion. In the first half of the 14th century, there were about 12.48 executions per year across Catalonia, which increased to 17.74 in the second half. However, these numbers varied greatly depending on the location. In cities like Barcelona, the number of executions was much higher, often exceeding 3 per year in the mid-14th century and rising to over 5 in the 1370s before falling again. In smaller rural areas, executions were rare, and the gallows often needed to be repaired or rebuilt when they were used. Professional executioners were typically found only in larger cities. In smaller towns, executioners had to be brought in from elsewhere, often from the capital, Barcelona. For example, when there was no hangman in Puigcerdà, one was usually brought from Perpignan, the capital of the region. Sometimes, executioners were also contracted from nearby cities like lese-majesty, which had strong economic and social ties to the area. In noble and baronial jurisdictions, the death penalty was not necessarily more common than in royal domains. However, the justice system in these areas was often seen as more arbitrary, and people sometimes preferred to live under the protection of nobles rather than the king. The king's propaganda, however, portrayed royal justice as soft and sweet compared to the harshness of noble justice, aiming to convince people to support the king and help him reclaim lost jurisdiction. Popular tribunals, such as the Jui de Promens in Barcelona, showed a higher tendency to impose the death penalty. About 38.5% of their sentences included capital punishment, and another 50.47% involved other physical punishments. These tribunals favored quick and severe justice, which was seen as more effective and moralizing by the people. The death penalty was also more common during periods of social tension. For example, after the Serial Crisis of 1376, Barcelona saw 18 death sentences in the following 3 years. The punishment for crimes like stealing grain or wheat became more severe during these times. The concern for maintaining social and moral order was closely tied to preserving the prosperity of towns and avoiding divine wrath. Offenses that were considered particularly grave, such as blasphemy or sexual acts deemed unnatural, could lead to the death penalty. For instance, in 1495, Domingo Labat was executed for engaging in anal penetration with his wife, which was seen as a crime against nature. Crimes against the faith, such as heresy and blasphemy, were also punished harshly. Blasphemy, which had previously been punished with fines, began to carry the death penalty in the late 14th century. This change reflected a growing fear of divine wrath and a stronger Christian religiosity. Similarly, sorcery and witchcraft, often associated with women, became increasingly criminalized and could lead to the death penalty. In 1485, a woman in the Pyrenees was executed for poisoning and worshipping the devil. Sexual relations between Christians and non-Christians were also severely punished. Any non-Christian man who had sexual relations with a Christian woman faced the death penalty. This was particularly true in areas like Tortosa, where such relations became more common. Finally, the crime of lese-majesty, which included acts like espionage, could also result in the death penalty. In 1385, a Frenchman caught spying for the Count of Empúries was executed. Similarly, in 1391, a Muslim hermit in Tortosa was burned at the stake for allegedly aiding pirates. These harsh punishments were intended to deter others from similar acts and to maintain the authority of the state. The consolidation of royal power led to severe punishments for crimes that directly threatened the monarch's authority, such as counterfeiting. In medieval Europe, counterfeiting was often treated as a crime of lese-majesty, a serious offense against the king's dignity and power. Forgers were often given capital punishment, and their tools were publicly destroyed. This harsh treatment was part of the monarch's strategy to centralize power and assert control over the coinage, a crucial royal prerogative. Murder, especially in times of social tension, was almost always punished by death. The severity of the punishment was intended to deter violence and maintain social order, particularly in towns divided by factions. However, the social status of the murderer and the victim could influence the judge's decision. Sometimes, fines or other forms of compensation could redeem a murderer, but this was rare. The king's power to pardon or commute sentences could also play a role, often used to manage public opinion or for political reasons. The killing of a wife for adultery was treated with particular leniency, often resulting in remission of the death penalty. This was seen as a way for the king to gain popularity, though it did not mean adultery was generally accepted as a justification for murder. Poisoning, however, was considered an especially heinous crime due to its unpredictable and treacherous nature, often linked to magic or diabolical practices. Capital punishment was frequently imposed for poisoning, even when the evidence was difficult to prove. Sexual violence, particularly the rape of women and the kidnapping of minors, was punished with the death penalty if reparations could not be made. The rape of a married woman was seen as an offense against her husband, but the rape of a single woman, especially a minor, was considered more serious due to the irreparable damage to her virginity. The harshest punishments were reserved for those who preyed on very young girls. Capital punishment was also used to maintain public order and economic stability. Bankers who went bankrupt and failed to indemnify their clients could be executed, as seen in the case of Francis Casello. In the 15th century, concerns about public order in Barcelona led to the formation of political parties or gavels, which were seen as a threat to social stability. The tensions between these factions sometimes erupted into violence, leading to capital punishment for those involved in political plots. Theft, while not usually punished by death, could be if the thief was a repeat offender or stole goods of significant value. Prince John, for instance, ordered the hanging of a man who stole wood from a royal galley. During times of scarcity, theft of grain could also lead to execution. Livestock theft, especially in rural areas, was often punished with death. The repeated commission of crimes, such as theft or other offenses, was seen as evidence of a person's incorrigibility and danger to society, often resulting in capital punishment. The severity of punishment was also influenced by the public fame of the accused, how they were perceived by the community. Those with a reputation for disorderly behavior, such as perjury, blasphemy, or adultery, were more likely to be considered guilty and receive harsher sentences. Being poor and without a trade made one more vulnerable to severe punishment, as these individuals were seen as a greater threat to social order. In summary, the use of capital punishment in medieval Europe was a tool for consolidating royal power, maintaining social order, and deterring serious crimes. The severity of the punishment was often influenced by the nature of the crime, the social status of the accused, and the prevailing social and political conditions. The goal was to create a society where the king's authority was unchallenged, and public order was maintained through the fear of harsh punishment.